Hello and welcome back to Premier Injuries. Here we are talking with Mr. Ben Dinnery himself, the injury expert, and as we say before, my on-air husband. We talk every week to you guys here, so make sure to hit that subscribe button and like and share these videos as well, because we've got a load of great content coming out Mondays through to Fridays, and it will be coming thick and fast through the summer as well. We've got Euros content lined up. We've got some great interviews and some other stuff that we will be teasing for the future. But for now, make sure to stay subscribed because we're getting towards the business end of the season. And as we hit that business end of the season, we do have to talk about fatigue, load management, and how to manage players. There is the focus on Manchester United this week because they've got such a tight fixture list, but we do want to talk about it in footballing terms in general. So Ben, let's talk about it. Load management. You tweeted this week about FIFPro's discussion. This is an amazing insight, isn't it?
It is, yes, and it's coincided quite nicely. I think the actual study itself was released within 24 hours of the Premier League announcing that Manchester United had a triple game week 35. And of course, that followed on from their Europa League tie against Roma on Thursday evening to make, 4 games across 8 days, which, in itself is unheard of. And when you talk about pushing players to the limit, about being in their red zone, Manchester United during this period just encapsulate that. So it coincided really nicely, and it just got the juices flowing, and wondered how their study would correlate to maybe what United players would be going through. And then also, again, how does that translate into the fantasy arena? What does that make, and how do we help sort of interpret that from a fantasy perspective?
And there are some great fantasy perspectives here because we've done some number crunching here. You found some great conclusions here. Do you want to talk us through how this actually relates to players and when they're under these pressured situations, if there is an improvement or if there's a downgrade in their performances?
Yeah. So what in essence, how I started was a FIFPro study went back to May 2018 and ran through until the end of January this year, January 2021. And what they'd done, they actually documented playing time, travel time, number of hours between fixtures, and they correlated all this information together to produce all of these stats and these numbers. And I used that as a baseline to help maybe understand and maybe help sort of predict or interpret what we can potentially see coming forward for this upcoming game week. And within the FIFA study, it was quite nice. They actually covered 3 Manchester United players of the 200 plus that they did the study on. So that was really nice, and that lent itself really well for us as the community, because during that, when that report went live, all of the community, the Twitter sphere, social media channels were buzzing about triple captains, bench boost, 3 United players taking hits, getting them all in, and it was almost like, is this too good to be true? Are we getting hoodwinked here? Is this lure of 3 fixtures in 1 game week? Bear in mind they played in the Europa League. Is this, it's almost like a little bit of forbidden fruit. It tastes a little bit nice at the beginning there. Sunday's game against Aston Villa, but will it turn to poison? And are we going to keel over and drop down dead by the time we play maybe Liverpool on Thursday night? So that was the premise of this study. And what we wanted to do, I wanted to look at, right, although we couldn't find any like-for-like comparisons, because this is a very unique, and it's a word that we've overused in recent times, unprecedented times. But we wanted to look at minutes and an accumulation of minutes over a period. So the FIFPro study itself, it measures, or it tracked the number of minutes a player had played over a 14-day period. And what I wanted to do was try to find something comparable to this upcoming game week. So we looked at where players were required or had been involved for more than 450 minutes over a 14-day period. And of those periods, what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at performance, so in terms of what their outputs were. And then I correlated that and overlaid that with using the Fantasy Hub predicted fantasy points overlay to see what those points predicted at the time. And then we looked at, well, actually, that was predicted, but what actually was delivered at the end of it. And we come out with some, very interesting results.
And this was relating, as you said there, to 3 Man United players, which we're going to talk through now, the amazing findings. And like you said, that this can really relate to the FPL community as well. There's going to be a lot of things learned that we're going to move forward with through the summer and into next season as well. But those 3 players were Harry Maguire, Bruno Fernandes and Marcus Rashford. So during this time, Harry Maguire played 3,060 minutes, Fernandes 2,921 and Marcus 2,785. But what were the findings then in terms of expected FPL points and then their actual FPL points?
Yeah, so I mean, again, to give a little bit of context, I wanted to understand, because we've heard from Ollie, and Ollie said, during this period, I will be rotating. There's, the league talks about protecting the integrity of the Premier League and not putting out weakened sides. But when we're talking about maybe a third game in less than 5 days, when Manchester United kick off on Tuesday evening, I think it's something like 4 days and 20 or so hours, then, there's a realization that something needs to happen, or these players are going to be at serious risk of picking up an injury. But I wanted to look at just, those 3 players, how often they played, how often they were in the starting lineup, how many minutes they completed at the time, and, the average maybe rest time between games, just to give an understanding of maybe what Ollie's thinking is and what's happening behind the scenes and what the sports science department are saying to Ollie, because they will be directing the manager and the coach. Decisions will be player-led, but those discussions will be happening, considering the pros and the cons, and obviously those remaining fixtures as well. So, to give you an example, we have somebody like Harry Kane. Now, over that period of the FIFPro program, he's appeared in 98.6% of all starting lineups. And in almost 94% of his games, he plays 90 minutes or more. So the guy can tolerate the demands of the game. He's fairly robust. And he averages around about 147 hours game to game over that period, and a quarter of all of these games in that time have taken place where he's had less than 3 days rest. So we know that Harry Maguire is able to tolerate the demands. However, what we didn't foresee was Harry Maguire suffering an ankle injury on Sunday against Aston Villa, which is likely to put him out certainly of the second game, and I would suggest probably that third game as well, based on those initial sort of discussions and what we know. Then we look at the 2 players who've been attracting a lot of interest for the fantasy community. First and foremost, Bruno. So Bruno Fernandes. We looked at the average number of minutes he plays. So we're talking, over 87 minutes. And he's in the starting lineup. He's appeared in that lineup over 92% of the time, almost in that 3-year period. And 3/4 of those games, or just under, he plays, 90 minutes or more. And again, we're talking about 139 hours rest on average between games. And in a quarter of all of those games, he's had less than 3 days rest. And, the numbers are similar with Marcus Rashford, although, a couple of injury problems in between have meant that, his numbers aren't as maybe as high as the other 2 guys. But take those couple of big injuries out of the equation, and he's still producing, an average of 75 minutes. He's in 77% of all starting lineups, and almost half of all his games he's playing 90 minutes or more. But out of all of those players, he's had the least amount of rest on average between games, so at only 135 hours. Now, what a lot of us maybe looking ahead to this triple game week might have thought, well, if players are fatigued, if players are tired, and if they're going to start, how is that going to affect their games in terms of outputs? Now, there's a lot of ways to measure performance, but for us and for this study, and to make it more relevant for fantasy, like I say, we use the Fantasy Hub metric of that expected fantasy points goal, just to see what the players were predicted. So we identified all of those periods of times where those players were playing at 450 minutes plus, and we calculated and brought all of those together to give us a number. And then we cross-referenced that with the actual returns of the player. Now, it may come of no surprise that Harry Maguire, and Marcus Rashford, they've both underperformed their expected fantasy output by considerable amounts. Harry Maguire by 45%, and Marcus Rashford on 54%, down on that expected. Now, for Harry Maguire, obviously it's maybe more reflective because his points are based on that clean sheets, and it's not necessarily that individual performance. So we did scratch a little bit beneath the surface and looked at his individual outputs as well, and all of his metrics were down on those games after those periods where they were really sort of stressed and were suffering from high levels of fatigue. Whereas Rashford, it's maybe easier to sort of calculate and calibrate when you're thinking mainly your outputs are goals and assists. So like I say, the fact that maybe Marcus Rashford delivered under, again, his expected points on Sunday at Aston Villa, and also Harry Maguire, shouldn't come as any great surprise. However, and again, we did see that Bruno Fernandes was able to exceed his expected ratio against Aston Villa, and also during that period of these occasions of these high demands of load, he's actually exceeded his expected points by almost 10%. So 9 point something percent. He's actually outperformed that. And again, that's probably indicative of how Bruno Fernandes has been really since he arrived at Old Trafford. I mean, we by no means did we see a vintage Bruno Fernandes on Sunday, but United get a penalty. He's been fairly anonymous throughout the game. And then he pops up, he gets a goal, and he grabs himself, a bonus point or what have you. And again, so that's reflective. And, so looking at the numbers, and if we're looking at, player selection decisions sometime in the future around, hectic fixture periods, then these types of numbers give us some kind of indication about where we should be leaning towards, and those types of players that we should be, picking for these games.
So with this kind of discussion now, I think that's a really good point, is almost that there will be individuals like Fernandes who are almost protected. And we saw that he's got a 9% exceeding the returns there. But do you think that is down to an anomaly, or is that down to the way that Fernandes plays? And will that then translate to other players that play in his style?
I think you have to consider the fact that he's on penalties, he's on set pieces. And yeah, look, he's a key figure in that United team. He's the talisman of that United. He lets them tick. So there's a lot of things going through him, and almost, he may not have the same amount of touches. He may not create the same amount of big chances. But what he does do is he has that quality. And when you've got the quality, you don't always need 3, 4, 5 chances to do that. It can just be one. And it's that one piece of individual brilliance, that one piece of class that creates that opportunity, that gets you that points return. And that's what Bruno's brought since he arrived at Old Trafford.
So let's continue with the discussions then for the FPL community then. Going forward, does that mean that people should be a little bit suspicious now of Manchester United assets? I mean, what has Ole Gunnar Solskjaer himself said about going forward beyond this game week?
Yeah, so we've heard from Ollie on Monday and his press conference, and he's basically he isn't happy with the situation, and quite rightly so. Like I say, there's going to be 4 games across an 8-day period, and United still have a lot to play for. I mean, I don't, for any stretch of the imagination, think that they're going to win the Premier League title, but they'll want to secure that second place, and they've still got Chelsea and Leicester breathing down the neck. So they can't really afford too many slip-ups with that. So Ollie spoke about involving some of players from the under-23s and the development squad, and he talked about the reference and how the Premier League said you don't want to ruin the integrity of the league by playing your non-sort of standard start 11, and he's sort of thrown that out the window and said, well, when you schedule games like this, what can you expect? This is, again, if players play at this level with this amount of space between games, the risk of injury is great. And, potentially what we're talking about here is not only ruling players out of the fixture run-in, but you've also got a Europa League final, and then you've also got the Euros coming up as well. So I've seen on social media 1 or 2 predicted Manchester United lineups. I'll take those with a pinch of salt, as it is. I don't know the inner workings of Manchester United at all, or how Ollie likes to work things. I mean, a few responses to those predicted lineups are, there's no way Ollie would be picking his team now, because we're still waiting to see how players recover. So typically, United played on Sunday. They would be given a rest day on Monday, and then they would come in on the Tuesday and they would be assessed. There'll be post-match recovery strategies in place, and they'll be in today. But again, for some of those players, decisions may not be made until the Tuesday anyway. That's pretty standard and par for the course. However, you also have managers maybe like sort of Rafa Benitez, when he, at his time at Newcastle, where they literally would sit down with the sports science department. They would look through the fixture schedule. They would identify almost hotspots, players, where potentially were at risk because of the number of games between in a certain period, and they would pick teams in advance. So they would have a starting 11 maybe 3 or 4 weeks in advance, and barring injuries and barring suspensions, that's how that team would line up, regardless of form or anything like that. They would work with it, and you'd say, right, I want to, keep injuries, minimize the risk of any injuries. This is a team I'm going to go with. And there's nothing to say that Ollie didn't sit down with his backroom staff, looked through players' history, looked through their data, looked at those who are maybe pushing in that red zone and thinking, right, well, actually, this is a situation that we're going to have to weigh up the pros and cons, and we're going to have to decide, do we go with a real strong team on Tuesday and maybe weaken it against Liverpool? Or, now that we've got the 3 points at Aston Villa, we can maybe afford to just take our foot off the gas, change a few players, and then, a big game against Liverpool, against their Northwest rivals, we'll go back out full bore and we'll go for the 3 points.
So going forward, your advice kind of remains the same, though, isn't it? That these predicted lineups, these team leaks, I think we've said this through the season, ignore those. I mean, you yourself do write predicted lineups, but that is purely because you have statistical evidence to back this up. You're not claiming to be in the know, and you're kind of saying statistically these players are lower risk and therefore a team are more likely to predict them. But you yourself say often that these aren't religious, that they're not going to be 100% correct. This is just guidance, because nobody knows. Nobody knows what's going on with Solskjaer. He might decide to play Greenwood in goal for 1 week just because he can do that. Anything can happen. But in terms of it then, I think that we've covered all that we need to with this data show today. As always, I remind people, as I did at the start, make sure to subscribe to the channel because we've got plenty of these amazing insights coming up towards the end of this season, but also through the summer and building up to your FPL seasons next year as well. But it doesn't have to be for FPL as well. This can be used for any sorts of football analysis. But yes, so make sure to subscribe, like and share because this information is really valuable and can help people understand the game a little bit more. But I'm just going to hand to you, Ben, to say the goodbyes.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Really enjoyed that. And if you did too, by all means, leave comments in the box below. We can drill down a little bit further in the data. This is something that we'll probably take through maybe to the summer. And those who are interested in playing the Euro fantasy game, whether that be through the official UEFA one or, the big £1 million fan team official game that's currently live, then yeah, look, a lot of this information, a lot of these key points that we're raising are easily translatable into that tournament because you're going to have players who are required to be playing every 3 and 4 days. And, as fantasy managers, if you want to get the edge over your opponent and win some big money, then, these are the types of insights and the understanding that you're going to need to help sort of just, give you that little bit of a push and hopefully a few extra points on the board. But yeah, look, really enjoyed it, Jason. So thanks again. That's the Monday night data show done for this week. And we'll be back very soon. Speaking to the fantasy doc, Raj Bra from 3CB Performance. So keep your eyes and ears open and keep tuned and we'll speak soon.